welcome to ongoing election coverage by Town Meeting Television. This forum is for candidates for Lieutenant Governor for the state of Vermont, and it's one of 22 forums we're bringing you in advance of the November elections. Town Meeting TV election forums introduce you to the candidates and connect you with issues that shape your local community and your state. All of the candidates on the ballot are invited to participate. And tonight we have with us Ralph Corbo from Banished the F-35s, Molly Gray running as a Democrat, and Scott Milne running as a Republican. So we have 3 of the 4 candidates with us tonight. If you're watching live, we welcome your questions at 802-862-3966. We'll be starting with some questions, and we'll probably be taking caller questions maybe 10 minutes or so into the forum. And watch Town Meeting TV on Comcast channel 1087, Burlington Telecom channel 17 and 217, as well as online at Town Meeting TV's YouTube page. So you must be watching us in one of those ways. I'm going to start by giving the candidates who are with us tonight a chance to do opening statements of about a minute. And I'm going to go in alphabetical order, and I'm going to start with Ralph Corbo. So Ralph, you're on.
How much time?
You have between a minute and a minute and a half tops.
Okay. Good evening, my brothers and sisters in the Chittenden County area, and those of you I've worked with alongside to banish the F-35s forever from Vermont. Most of you got to know about me for the first time in the recent August primaries for governor and U.S. House of Representatives. Those were the dress rehearsals. Now I am in it to win it, as I seek your votes to become the next Lieutenant Governor of Vermont. I intend to transform the office from one of passive bystander to active advocate for the crucial elements of Vermont that are under attack from this and previous state and federal administrations. We all know that Vermont's most treasured asset, as the late Vermont Governor Dean Davis said, should always be its highest priority, is its natural environment. From that principle, I will make it my mission as Lieutenant Governor to be ever vigilant and move with all my might against those who steer against Mother Nature for the sake of power and riches. From that principle will also flow my advocacy to turn Vermont away from the industries of pollution, death, and destruction to a life-affirming change of a green peace economy.
Great. Thank you very much, Ralph. I'm going to go to Molly Gray. You're on.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good evening to my opponents, Scott and Ralph. Good evening to everyone tuning in tonight. And I'd like to just take a moment to thank everyone who's working in public television, providing important servicing and programming and information for Vermonters across this state, and especially during this pandemic. I also want to take a moment to recognize the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg, who is a champion for equal rights. And I wrote down one of her quotes, fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. This November, the future of our nation and the future of Vermont is on the ballot. We face a global pandemic, justifiable social unrest, economic challenges like we haven't seen in a long time. But there's another crisis, our demographics crisis, and it's one that affects us right here in Vermont. We've struggled to keep a generation here, draw a generation back, and draw a new generation to our state. I grew up on a vegetable and dairy farm run by my parents and brothers today. I'm a proud product of our education system. I've worked in Congress for Congressman Peter Welch and across the globe in times of crisis with the Red Cross. I came home to Vermont because, like so many of us, you can leave the state, but it never leaves you. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor because we have to focus on our greatest challenges and turning them into our greatest opportunities: broadband, childcare, workforce development, so a generation can stay here, can come back, and can come to our state. It's time to put people before politics and unite Vermont for a brighter future. That's why I'm running, and I look forward to answering your questions and having a lively discussion tonight about my vision for Vermont.
Thank you. Scott, tell us why you're running.
Stephanie, Molly, Ralph, great to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to viewers tonight. My name's Scott Milne. I'm a Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Interestingly, got here when I was about 90 days old. Spent my formative years on a old sheep farm in Orange County, Vermont, town of Washington. Was really blessed, won the lottery in the parent department. My mom and dad were both prolific public servants. My mom, my dad, my grandfather all served as citizen legislators in the Vermont legislature. Saw my mom make a tough decision and vote for civil unions in 2000. It cost her legislative seat, excuse me, which was very important to her. But you know, her stepping across party lines and doing what was right rather than what was politically expedient, I think sparked the last 20 years of massive, unexpected and unprecedented growth of equal rights across America. That's a great inspiration. I'm intending to honor those who come before me with this campaign. What I bring to the table that I believe is unique is 30 years of experience building a private business, growing jobs. That business was closed for one day in its first 40 years. That was the day that we buried my mom. Last week, all of our offices between Westchester County, New York and Northeast Maine have been closed for a full 6 months. Every office is locked. There's a couple offices where folks don't have broadband at home where single individuals are working, but that's what's happened to my company. That's what's happened all across Vermont. That's what's happened all across America and frankly, all across the globe. Travel and tourism is the largest employer of people on the planet. As we work our way out of this healthcare crisis, reopen our economy safely and responsibly, I'm looking forward to be a partner with Governor Scott, working hand in hand with him, reaching across the aisle in the legislature and with the governor's office to get things done. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm hearing from our engineer that we're having some technical difficulties, so we need to pause the forum for just a few moments. Stick with us, we'll be right back.
Thank you.
right. Well, welcome back and thanks for being patient with us as we work through some technical difficulties. But we are back with 3 candidates for Lieutenant Governor. We have with us Scott Milne, the Republican, Molly Gray, the Democrat, and Ralph Corbo, the F-35's candidate. And I'm going to start with a question to each of the candidates, and then I'm going to go, we have a caller on the line. I'm going to start with one question first and then go to the caller. And the question I'd like to have Scott Milne start with is, what do you think is the biggest impact from the last 6 months of COVID shutdowns? What are you going to do to mitigate these impacts? And you have up to a minute and a half, Scott.
Sure. Well, I talked a little bit about my personal experience with a business that's been in our family for 45 years, closed one day to celebrate my mom's life with her funeral, and now has been closed for 6 months. So over the 6 months, I think I'm in the travel and tourism business, a lot of lodging, restaurants, travel and tourism businesses all over Vermont that are in similar situations. Again, travel and tourism is the largest employer of people on the planet. I think it's important to remember that even though our unemployment numbers are going down, there's, I think, 1,200 fewer people employed in Vermont in August than in July. There's fewer people employed in Vermont today than there has been any time this century. So the last 6 months has been profoundly impactful on our economy. I'm running for a lieutenant governor to bring my 30 years of private sector experience to partner with Phil Scott to bring forward a progress VT plan. Go to scottmilne.org if you have time, check out. We got 60 specific proposals about what we can do to get our economy back on track. Things like eliminating taxes on Social Security and military pensions, strategic investments in broadband, making childcare more affordable just by adopting some regulations that we see across the river in New Hampshire. Vermont can be and should be a place where people want to move to and not move from. I'm looking forward to building bridges across the aisle, to being a partner with Governor Scott, getting to Montpelier and getting things done for Vermonters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Molly Gray, what would you do to mitigate COVID impacts of the last 6 months?
In recent weeks, I've been traveling around the state, conducting community forums, connecting directly with Vermonters. I was up in the Northeast Kingdom 2 weeks ago, up in Craftsbury. I was in Richmond last week. Just this last weekend, I was down in Rutland and in Middlebury. I've invited Scott Milne to attend, and Scott, you continue to be welcome. And I can tell you what I hear from Vermonters every single day is that we have allowed our families and our communities in some ways to go without basic necessities. And again, I hear about the impact of a lack of equal access to the internet and broadband on Vermonters. A fourth of Vermont geographically still can't get online today, something like 70,000 homes and businesses. Back in March, 1 in 3 children in Newberry, where I grew up, couldn't get online. And that meant for teachers and for families, the only access to educational tools was packets printed out, put onto buses, and driven around the state. I intend, as Lieutenant Governor, to bring Vermonters together to work with our communication union districts and our federal delegation to help close the broadband gap so we can make sure we have access to good paying jobs, to remote work, to online learning, to telemedicine. Let's face it, investments in broadband are investments in our future. And that's just one thing that I hope to work on as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you very much, Molly. Ralph Corbo, what would you do to mitigate impacts from the last 6 months of COVID? Ralph Corbo, are you there?
He might still have his mute on.
Yeah. Is there, well, he's on the telephone. So let's see. Well, I'm going to give you another 5 seconds to weigh in, and if not, we'll go back to another time.
Unlike some of the, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
You're
I had to
on.
do star 6 twice.
Okay.
It wouldn't take it the first time.
Okay, you're on now.
So unlike some of the many short-term solutions we've been hearing from all sectors, whether it's federal or state, I will pursue the what's really been the underlying factor in this. And that has been decades and decades of pollutants and poor dietary policies that has been going on. We've been allowing our agricultural industry to be using all kinds of chemical and poisonous herbicides. Much of the pandemic response has been focused on a frenzied rush to vaccines. A significant unrecognized risk factor has been ignored: the exceedingly poor baseline health of the population. Nearly 3 or 4 Americans are overweight or obese. Half of the U.S. adults have diabetes or pre-diabetes conditions. 2018 study found that only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthily defined as having optimal levels of blood markers and pressures and waist circumference. So among the most significant factors for COVID-19 hospitalization and death are the presence of diet-related chronic diseases, such as hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. And what's fueled this? It's been this industrialized food policy that has been going on for decades, using chemical and poison. What?
I'm just, if you would wrap up your thought, thanks.
Yeah, it's been the policy of using poisonous chemical and herbicides, and that's an area that I will attack when I'm elected lieutenant governor.
Thanks very much for your response. I'd like to go to a caller that we have on the line now, and I'd like to ask the caller to say your name and what your question is for all the candidates. And we're going to start, I think that we'll start by having Scott Milne answer, and then Ralph Corbo, and then Molly Gray.
Okay. My name is Jason from Burlington. The question is for Scott Milne. I've been reading through your plan on your website, and as I read through it, I'm thinking, yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's good. It seems reasonable. But the overall impression I come away with is one of sort of timidity. And my question for you is, where's the boldness? We live in kind of desperate times right now, and I'm not seeing anything in your plan that seems up to the measure of where we're at today. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on how the lieutenant governor can actually be a leader in times when something more than small solutions are called for.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. There are more or less 60 specific proposals, and there are big ideas. Reducing the cost of agency of public safety, making police enforcement more efficient and more effective, and working for broadband in our rural communities, leveraging our outdoor economies, which is going to be vital for getting our economy back on track. If I take a step back, though, the Progress BT plan is a strategy to get to the goal which has drawn me into this race. We're in unprecedented economic times. We're in the worst economic situation America's been in since the Great Depression. I believe Governor Phil Scott is going to need a partner, not an adversary, in the Lieutenant Governor's office. Progress VT is a promise to Vermonters of what I'm going to be working on. It talks about making the Lieutenant Governor's office more transparent, more accountable. Talks about a lot of things that bold is in the eyes of the beholders. And I think it's a sensible, smart plan based on my 30 years of how to build a business, run a business, which is continuous improvement. So there's continuous improvement designed into the plan that we're putting forward. It's a blueprint for how we can get there. And if you have other ideas and you're watching tonight, let me know. It's clearly not all encompassing of what we'll be doing. But thank you very much for the question.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm going to go to Ralph next and ask a version of the question, which is, what are the key parts of how you would use the lieutenant governor's office, and particularly to make the boldest changes you can imagine?
Well, like I had sort of outlined earlier, I think one of the main factors is to start the movement from a military-industrial economy to a green peace economy. That's very important. We have to be careful in Vermont that we don't become totally immersed in a military-industrial complex like many other states have, which basically base their entire economy on weapons manufacturers. We already have here General Dynamics, Global Foundries, Century Arms, GE Aviation, and UGC Aerospace Systems, all making parts for the American Empire's war machine. That will change when I am elected lieutenant governor. As I will be an advocate and constantly on whoever is in office as the governor to start making a transition to a green peace economy, to eliminate the use of chemical and poisonous chemical herbicides and in agriculture, so that we can avoid the types of pandemic diseases that we're seeing run rampant in the last couple of decades, because all of our immune systems have been severely compromised.
All right. Thank you so much, Ralph. Appreciate it. And Molly, what are the key parts of your plan to use the lieutenant governor position, and particularly what's boldest in the plan?
The lieutenant governor's office is an incredibly important position, not only presiding over the Senate in the same way that a lawyer or judge would work or preside in a courtroom, right? The rules matter, the process matters. Working with the Senate and the House, with the governor, whomever that may be. But most importantly, as we recover stronger from COVID-19, elevating the voices of our communities and putting our communities and families at the forefront. And what does that mean? Before getting into this race, I took some time to make sure I knew why I was running and what I was going to do with the office. It was focusing on bringing a generation back, like myself, like me, bringing keeping a generation here, our graduates from our high schools and colleges, and drawing a new generation to the state and focusing on the constellation of issues and opportunities that makes Vermont a good place to live, to work, to thrive. It's closing the broadband gap. It's affordable, universal, accessible childcare for our working parents, and so they can stay in their jobs and don't have to choose between taking care of children and paying the bills. But it's also workforce development, and I want to touch upon that for just a moment. We have the highest graduation rate in the country and one of the best K through 12 education systems. What I hear from our businesses is that they can't recruit and retain workers. One thing we can do right now, and I'd like to focus on this as Lieutenant Governor, is how to strengthen the pathways from our classrooms, be it at CCV or VTC, right into our communities and those good paying jobs that exist across Vermont right now. So that's why I'm running. That's the future I see. And I strongly believe that if we unite this state, we can create more opportunity and build a stronger, brighter, more viable and sustainable Vermont for the future.
Great, thank you very much. I'm gonna ask you, Molly, to respond to another question first, and then I'll go to Scott and then Ralph. And this one is about racial justice. What's your response to the Black Lives Matter movement? What's next for Vermont and racial justice, and what role does the Lieutenant Governor's office play in this?
We're seeing justifiable social unrest across this nation, across the world. I think we'll look back at this year and this moment and say this is a historic moment for civil rights. Here in Vermont, we know we see bias. We know we see discrimination. We know we also have racism. We see it in our criminal justice system. We see it in our different institutions. Our job, I see myself and as a lieutenant governor in playing an incredibly important role in our future, is rooting out systemic racism wherever it exists. I want to talk about criminal justice for a moment. We see a disproportionate number of Vermonters of color engaged in traffic stops, pulled over by law enforcement, and incarcerated within our prison system here in the state. We've seen bold action over the last several months to reform Our use of force standards. I know there's legislation going through the legislature right now that's incredibly important, but we continue to have to strengthen our systems of accountability, be it through the mandatory use of body cameras, continuing to train our police and to focus on de-escalation, and also redefining our budget so we know what the responsibility of police is versus where we can invest in mental health and support services. The other piece is that as Lieutenant Governor, I think I have a responsibility that every time we talk about reforms, be it in criminal justice or in access to mental health and support services or education or housing or employment, we ask who is at the table. And if we have the same people, we'll see the same outcomes. So it's time to bring the voices of those who are most impacted in our communities to the table and work on real, lasting, meaningful reform here in the state.
Scott Milne, thank you very much, Molly. Scott Milne, your response to.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, Black Lives Matter. Secondly, all Americans and all Vermonters have the right to be, an expectation to be treated with dignity, especially by police and prosecutors and the criminal justice system. I'd like to just share a short story about earlier in my life. I was an investigator for the Washington, D.C. Public Defender's Office. First case I got was a person of color who was accused of assault with a deadly weapon, got arrested on a Friday night. I went out and did some investigating on a Saturday. On a Sunday, just using common Vermont sense. Got some depositions from people. Charges were dropped on Tuesday. I got a call from a crying mom thanking me for the work that I did. The lawyers in the office called me in and said, "Wow, what'd you do?" All this stuff. So, that was an experience where, coming from white Vermont, where it's a place where you have to listen and work to understand a lot of the issues that are on the forefront right now. That was a period in my life where every client I worked with was a person of color. Everything I saw in the criminal justice system, particularly as I look back on it now, is profoundly important as I work through this as your Lieutenant Governor. Regarding what we need to do, I'm supportive of the body cameras. I'm supportive of the change on chokeholds, ending the increased data collection. The Agency of Public Service collaboration that I talk about in my Progress VT plan will make police more accountable, more affordable, and more effective. I ask you to go to scottmilne.org, take a look at Progress VT. Talks a lot about some good plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Ralph Corbo, tell us your response to the Black Lives Matter movement and what's next for Vermont racial justice.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what's going down, I can tell you, is something that's been born out of necessity. You've had young people have finally realized that they've had to take matters into their own hands, because the killing, if they didn't, the killing would just never stop. The assassination of people of color, going all the way back to the days of Fred Hampton in Chicago in 1969, when he was assassinated by the Chicago Police Department. This is something that has been brewing for a long time, and the white establishment just has kept ignoring it. And now you've got young people that are finally fed up with the whole thing. It's always been there. In fact, that's why the military-industrial police state and old-line political establishments are so afraid of them, because they know that the system that they've kept in place for so long is going to be challenged and overthrown now. I think one of the main ways I could help them in the Office of Vermont Lieutenant Governor is to work to immediately stop all police agencies from accepting military hardware from the Pentagon to use to make war on the Vermont population. We should not have rolling police turn into like rolling military combat units out on the street when they accept all kinds of heavy military hardware from the battlefield.
Ralph, can
Another
I
thing that could
pause you there? I have a follow-up question for you. And I also see that we have another caller on the line, but I have a another viewer who just has sent in a question. And I'm going to start with you, Ralph, so you can continue with a short response to this question, which is that H478, an act relating to establishing a task force to study and consider a state apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery, will likely be reintroduced in the next biennium. Are reparations an appropriate response to white privilege? What ideas would you offer the task force if it's established by H478? So Ralph, do you have a response to that question?
Yeah, I think what's more important right now, and I believe the bill is H496. I haven't got a chance to follow up on it and see if it got passed, which I got a feeling it did not, because everything's been taken up by health matters, it seems like, in the legislature. Even more important is this bill H496, which would add teeth to basically not much that's in the current Vermont law to protect people, especially of color, from things like online and physical harassment and programs of that sort. Kind of like the thing we saw, what went down in Bennington with the Kaya Morris issue. Because there isn't really anything, as we saw, Attorney General Donovan basically had to say, according to the law, there was nothing he could do. So this bill that's currently in there, which I'm afraid it didn't get passed, is something that will add more teeth to this type of thing and really protect people from racial harassment and provide penalties for those who engage in those sort of practices. So while reparations may be something to be talked about at a certain point, I believe this type of thing is much more important. Get onto the books, especially where it hardly exists in Vermont. Get onto the books a law that will protect people of color, and there will be consequences for those who try to harass them and threaten them.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Really appreciate it. And Scott, I'm going to turn to you for a minute or so on that question. Do you want me to repeat it?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much. I was intrigued by Tom Steyer's presidential run, and one of the promises Vermonters, some people, obviously most people don't know me. Folks that know me maybe know me from the travel business or other business things I've done. Had a couple of statewide political runs before. Promise I've made consistently politically is I'll always listen before I act. The Steyer presidential run was an interesting thing to listen to. We talked about this in the primary when we were talking about racial justice. I would favor a establishment of a commission to include disadvantaged and minority communities, stakeholders, to look at how we can make investments in disadvantaged communities to help them get some of the residual effects of the last couple centuries moving in the right direction. And as I said, I'll, as Lieutenant Governor, I'll be an active listener, an active learner, hopefully an active partner with people. And it's something that I think is an interesting question.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. Molly,
You're welcome.
would you like me to repeat the question, or do you have it?
I'm fine, thank you. I would certainly support a reintroduction of the legislation and a study bringing together those who are most impacted from across our state. I think now is a moment to listen, to learn, to support and act. So often, I think as Vermonters, we say, we're a state of immigrants. I'll admit my family came here in the 1860s and gained citizenship through fighting in the Civil War. But that fails to acknowledge those who are working our lands, living on Vermont's land long before that. And I think this is a moment where we have to, as we are nationally, but also right here in Vermont, step back, reflect, and work to right the wrongs. I also just want to talk very briefly, following on the last question, about access to education, medicine, healthcare in our communities. And if we're going to address that as we move forward, we also need to acknowledge that we need to be a Vermont that welcomes people, including our new Vermonters, and making sure that in a global pandemic, we're translating basic health and safety information into the languages of all of our Vermonters. So we have so much work to do, and I'd certainly support the study, the reintroduction of the bill, and anything we can do around reparations in the state.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a caller, so I'm going to go to the caller next. And if you would ask a question that all the candidates can address.
Hi. Like so many Vermonters, I'm concerned about the unfunded pension liability, the cleaning up of Lake Champlain, right? Climate, and access to broadband. However, none of those goals or achieving those goals would be obtainable without first small businesses surviving. What specific expertise and actions would you take to ensure that small businesses thrive and grow so that they can pay taxes, so that we can clean the lake, so that we can clean the environment, so that we can repay the pension liability, and so that we do have broadband access? I think the role of Lieutenant Governor is more critical now than it's ever been. And I'd like to know what specific actions you're capable of taking and what expertise you have.
Great, thank you very much for that question. I'm going to, the order I'm going to have people address that is Molly, Ralph, and Scott. And the question again is what steps would you take for small businesses to thrive and grow to support our many key priorities? All right, Molly, you're first.
I grew up on a vegetable and dairy farm that's still operated by my family today. I know what it's like to work for a small business. I helped launch and work at the Worthy Burger in South Royalton, which is a pretty well-known restaurant now, and worked with businesses throughout my life. I'm proud to also be supported by businesses across the state. And I think I'll quote our governor, actually our current governor, who's consistently said throughout this pandemic, we have to do a needs assessment. And it's true. We need access to broadband. We need access to childcare for our Vermonters. We need to figure out how we're going to keep a generation here so that when we talk about pension liability, we're expanding our tax base. So we have people paying in so that we can afford to pay our retirees who have given so much to Vermont. Our greatest challenge in this moment is aligning our budget with our greatest needs and aligning our needs with our values as a state and putting our communities, our families at the forefront. And our businesses, which are the heart and soul of our state, have been doing that. I was down in Waterbury for one of our community forums just last week and meeting with Sun Common, which is a business here in the state that employs something like 160, 180 Vermonters who are a lot of them coming from VTC and helping to grow jobs, helping to grow opportunity while contributing to a more climate resilient Vermont. So it can happen. Businesses are part of the solution. And I know as Lieutenant Governor, I'll be able to unite our state to get a lot of good done.
Great, thank you, Molly. Ralph, what steps would you take to ensure that small businesses thrive and grow to support the priorities we have as a state?
Well, in this kind of economic system that we have here, and under this current crisis, what's badly needed is the funds, money to hand out for this, what's taken place. Now, with that sort of thing, you can't be so myopic to think that you can search through the coffers of Vermont Treasury and find enough money for that. You have to be able to understand that things at the federal and global level in this day and age play a big part on what happens here. You've got a $741 billion defense budget at the federal level. Just think if that was cut 50% and divided up by 50 states. That'd be $6 billion coming back here in taxpayer dollars to be used. $6 billion is basically the entire Vermont state budget this year. So just imagine if we could turn the trend against the corrupt military-industrial complex and start claiming our hard-earned tax dollars from our sweat of Vermont workers that goes out to the federal government and federal income taxes and gets put into a $741 billion defense budget. To continue this corrupt system of endless phony wars for endless corporation profits, while these big weapons manufacturers laugh their pants off while we slave down here and they spend all our federal tax dollars and we get nothing back from that 741 billion in the possibility of grants and funds back here to help small businesses, to help child care, to help things like opioid rehabilitation services. All that money thrown away.
All right, thank you, Ralph. Okay, we have viewer questions. We have a viewer who's written in, and then we have one more caller on the line. So I'm going to ask.
Stephanie, do I get to answer that question, or do you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can just say, Scott, great answer, and we can move on. That will be fine with me if that works for you. But I'd be glad to just talk about it because it's vitally important.
That was
It's
my
vitally
error.
important.
I was planning ahead for the call, and I really want you to answer. I'm sure you have something to say about the steps that we take for small businesses.
Alrighty, well, it's always nice to be excluded from social events, so thank you very much. Well, first of all, when I look back on my life, I by osmosis, grew up on an old sheep farm. 50 years after sheep farms went extinct in Vermont. So, kind of when I look back on it now, I saw how important it is to pay attention to what's going on in the economy. And even 100 years ago, markets changing around the world affected the lives of Vermonters. That's happening now more than ever. And the Vermont legislature and the lieutenant governor can make a difference. I'm looking forward to putting my 30 years of experience working in a small business in Milne Travel, for which I'm known. When I bought a small branch from my parents 3 decades ago, it had one part-time employee. Coming into COVID, we had nearly 100 people. Then essentially the lights went out. But that's one of, I think, 7 businesses I've owned in my life. And Dan's question is a vital question. What are we going to do? I put a lot of thought into that. And rather than pie in the sky promises or things that can go on a bumper sticker, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, we created Progress VT, which you can go to scottmilne.org and read through. It's a comprehensive plan with 60 promises to Vermonters of what we can do to help us get it going in the right direction. Includes eliminating taxes on Social Security and military retirements, strategic investments in broadband, very good specific ideas on how to make childcare more affordable just by copying what New Hampshire is doing. These are all realistic ideas that we can do. I'm looking forward to being Phil Scott's partner, working across the aisle so we can get these things done. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for your patience with my tracking. I'm actually going to go to you next. I have a viewer question, and I'll take this one, and then we'll go to the caller that's on the line. And the viewer question is about Act 250. And it is, Act 250 is undergoing a so-called modernization. What do you think is the most important contribution of Act 250 to Vermont's environment? What's your opinion of dropping Act 250 review in designated downtowns? And Scott, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Ralph and then Molly on this.
It's a great question, and thank you very much for it. My political awareness, came into being around the Dean Davis administration. Actually, I was a big fan of Governor Phil Hoff's, but the Dean Davis and Act 250 is one of the best things that's ever happened to Vermont. It's been morphed into a tool to give local communities to have the power to do what they wanted to do, and it's been hijacked where it's used to kind of push things upon local communities that they don't want. It's been used to, enable people to get third-party status when it wasn't really what's originally intended to do. To answer your question, I do favor, I wouldn't say dropping Act 250 review, but again, specifically, it's hard to answer these questions in 90 seconds. Progress VT at scottmilne.org, we talk about there should not be Act 250 review on recreational trails. That's stifling our outdoor economy. There should not be Act 250 review on ancillary businesses on farms. That's stifling growth of our farmers when dairy farmers and other farmers are all dealing with all these other problems anyway. There should be a thoughtful application of when people can get party status, get situations where somebody's competitor is going to open a better business across the street and they can use Act 250 as a competitive tool. That is not Dean Davis's intent. That's not what Act 250 should be doing. But let's make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Act 250 has been very, very good for Vermont. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Ralph, your response to the most important contribution of Act 250 and your opinion of dropping Act 250 review in designated downtowns.
Well, the most important thing going by its history was it stopped Vermont from being turned into another New Jersey. Thank God Dean Davis had the guts and had the principle that he knew that Vermont's most treasured asset and its highest priority should always be its natural environment. It's what makes Vermont, Vermont. Without that, we might as well just become another polluted, corrupt New Jersey or something like that. He was right, totally, to bring that program into being. And if he hadn't, we'd be in really bad straits right now. The thing that really should have been, and he lamented in his autobiography, that was supposed to have been implemented with that was a statewide land use plan to make Act 250 even stronger. Unfortunately, without that, that's one of the reasons we have so many problems nowadays with things. So I think he was able to do a Herculean job, but unfortunately, the powers that be wouldn't let him go to do completely what needed to be done. And in that sense, I think we need to keep it as Act 250 as strong as possible and see what can be done to strengthen it even further. Because without our environment, we might as well just call ourselves another New Jersey.
Thank you, Ralph. Molly, your response to Act 250?
I grew up on a farm in Newberry, and the motto for the farm is basically taking care of the land and environment that's taking care of us. And I think that in many ways is the spirit of Act 250. But what we know is Act 250 is now, I think 50 years old, I believe, this year. And what I hear from our businesses and those who are trying to thoughtfully develop projects here in Vermont in a way that takes care of the land is that we struggle to see consistency, predictability, and also clarity, right? Which are all the things that you need if you're going to put a permit in. So I fully support the efforts that are happening in the legislature right now. I know that there's elements of the initial Act 250 bill that was introduced this year that's now going through the Senate. I think there's probably more work to be done. But here's the thing. I was up in Lamoille County just 2 weeks ago and went on the rail trail. I don't think we could have ever imagined electric bikes on a rail trail going through northern Vermont, but that's the world we live in now. So we just need to modernize this law in a way that adapts to the way that Vermont is developing, in a way that's green, that's economical, that preserves our working land and environment, but also sets us up to be a resilient, sustainable, viable place to live, work, start a business, and play in the future.
Great, thank you. So we just have a few more minutes left. What I'd like to do is hear the question of the caller. And I do want to give each of the three candidates a chance to say something in closing. I think I'm going to have you do that. I'll start with Molly and then Ralph and then Scott to close us out. And I'd like to hear the caller's question, and you might briefly address in your last words the caller's question, but I'd also like you to make any closing points that you want to make. So can we hear from the caller? A brief question?
We're on the air.
My question is for Molly. What's your plan for your ideas sound great and all, but how much do you think they will cost, and how do you plan to pay for them?
Caller, could you repeat that question? I couldn't hear it very well. Did anyone else get it?
I
How
think
much
the
is,
question was,
yeah, yeah.
how do you
Molly,
pay
your
for
ideas
it?
sound great and all, but how much do you think they will cost, and how do you plan to pay for them?
Great. Thank you so much for your call. And you know what, running for office, you get questions, how are you going to pay for it? And I'm sure Scott has thought about how he's going to pay for the 60 different programs that he's putting forward in Progress Vermont. But I'll go back to what our governor has said throughout this pandemic. We have to identify the need. And what I know from working in crisis with the Red Cross in Africa and the Middle East and running field missions into places like Baghdad and having the security of teams under me, we have to, when we come out of crisis, we have to align our budget with our greatest needs. And all you have to do is get around the state and meet with communities. And I'm not Molly Gray speaking, I'm now speaking for the communities that I've spoken with as part of the forums that we're doing. We still don't have access to internet for 4th of Vermont. We still don't have access to childcare. We have families that are trying to choose between how to care for loved ones who have COVID-19 and pay the bills because we still don't have anything close to paid family and medical leave. If we align our budget with our greatest needs, I know we have the financial capacity to build a stronger Vermont for the future as we recover from COVID-19. But in closing, I'll share this. I got into this race because we cannot keep a generation here. We're struggling to do it. We can't bring a generation back. And we've struggled to bring a new generation to Vermont. We face an incredibly serious demographics crisis. We don't have a plan to care for our older Vermonters. So if we're going to expand our tax base and have a resilient budget for the future, we have got to figure that out. And everyone knows that means making strategic investments where you'll see a return on investment. So we're going to align our budget with our greatest needs. We're going to see a return on investment, and we're going to build a Vermont that's equitable, that's inclusive, that's sustainable, and where people are able to thrive as we move forward. And that's why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Ralph, your brief closing.
Well, I'll just say in closing that as Lieutenant Governor in particular, I will be an active and vocal advocate against the F-35 basing, which was forced upon the citizens of Vermont by the efforts of Senator Patrick Leahy, Frank Chiaffi, the president of the Greater Burlington Industrial Corporation, Ernie Pomerleau, CEO of Pomerleau Real Estate Agency, and others in their military-industrial congressional complex cabal. I'm also going to advocate to restore the very important democratic principle of open invitation, live media candidate debate policy, which is being destroyed by media moguls like Scott Finn and Sarah Ashworth of Vermont Public Radio and Ann Galloway of Vermont Digger News. In addition, I'll champion much needed vital legislation to protect Vermont citizens of all color and gender from white supremacist police and militia terrorism, advocate for a transition to a green, clean, peace economy in both agriculture and manufacturing, lower the voting age in the state of Vermont, and also defend its most treasured and important asset, its natural environment.
Thank you, Ralph. Scott, your statement.
Sure. Stephanie, everybody listening, watching on the panel tonight, thank you very much. This is the first public debate of several in this year's 2020 Lieutenant Governor's race. It's an important time in Vermont history. Vermont's at a crossroads. We're coming off a once-in-a-century health crisis, and we're coming into the biggest economic problems we've seen in several generations. I know Vermonters are hurting. And I also know that too many people in Montpelier just don't get it because they've never actually lived it. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor to leverage my small business experience to be a partner for Governor Scott so we can tackle COVID and reopen safely and responsibly and emerge stronger than ever. We need to make Vermont a place affordable to live, to work, to raise a family, and to prosper. I released Progress VT. It's a comprehensive blueprint for Vermont. I don't want to brag. Former governor says it's clearly the most comprehensive plan of any candidate in this race. Former state senators have told me it's the most comprehensive plan they've seen from a lieutenant governor in their lifetime. So whether it's bold or not is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But it's a specific plan that talks about repealing tax on Social Security and military pensions, great for our seniors. Strategic investments in broadband, great for our economy, great for rural Vermont. Specific, affordable plans to make childcare more affordable. These are realistic plans. They're not pie in the sky promises that we don't want to talk about how much they cost. You can check it out at scottmilne.org. I'm looking forward to getting to work for you. I'm looking forward to accomplishing things as your Lieutenant Governor, and please be part of the team and help us get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all candidates, Scott Milne and Molly Gray and Ralph.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me on, since you're the only media agency that is allowing alternative party and independent candidates. We're being shut out by the rest of the media.